Drake Maye has a rough start to his biggest week of camp in 2025. That's where we begin on this episode of Locked On Patriots.
You are Locked On Patriots, your daily New England Patriots podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Patriots fans? I am your host, Nick Cattles, born and raised in New England, also host of the Everything Pats podcast, co-host of the Greg Bedard Patriots podcast with Nick Cattles, and a sports talk show host veteran. On today's episode, Josh McDaniels is telling us everything we need to know about this offensive line by the way he's approaching his play calling, and the defense puts together a very solid start to their work week. But first, Drake Maye fights it on Sunday. We appreciate you joining the show, making us your first listen, and for being an everydayer. The Locked On Patriots podcast is a proud partner of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. This week, as we get ready for the Minnesota Vikings joint practices, is the biggest week of camp. And I'm not just saying that because of hyperbole. I'm saying it because I mean it. I've said this from the very beginning, the beginning of OTAs. This week is the most crucial week to camp. You get to next week, third preseason game. Who knows if anybody's going to play? And then you've got the week and a half off before you kick off week one against the Raiders at Gillette. This is the biggest week. And if you don't want to believe me, I bring you back to a Karen Guregian column in early June when she sat down and spoke with Brian Hoyer. Here's what Guregian wrote. The second week of August, joint practices with the Vikings. Circled those dates on the calendar. Why? For anyone wondering the best time to get a read on Drake Maye, and if he's going to make a year two leap with a new offensive coordinator and new offense, see where he's at during those joint practices. See how he looks then. That'll be the best barometer. At least that's the view of Brian Hoyer, who played for 9 different teams and had to learn nearly as many offenses along the ride. Here's what Hoyer told Guregian. Quote, when he gets to the week of practicing against the Vikings, and of course, that's this week, that'll be a great barometer. You'll be able to sit there and watch multiple practices against a different defense, and you'll have a really good feeling. If he goes out and has a Mac Jones type of day against the Giants, they should all feel really good about where he's at. Now, I know some people might freak out with just the idea, the notion of a Mac Jones practice against the Giants. But if you go back to Mac's rookie season, 2021, he lit up the Giants. And that's where people thought, hey, he's a starting quarterback. He's ready to go. And we know that Mac was better in 21 than he was the following 2 years. But the thought of Brian Hoyer is, does Drake Maye have his best practices against the Vikings in the joint practice environment? Because if he does, he has taken all the steps he needs to take to feel good about a year two leap. Everything building up to this week has meant an awful lot, but this week means the most. He has to put it all together against a tough defense in Minnesota. And frankly, Maye started off the week not great. It was a rough start on Sunday. Andrew Callahan posted, bad day for Maye. 5 of 13, possible pick, 2 sacks, fumbled snap. Doug Kyde, not his best performance. Mike Giardi, not the offense's finest day. Maye struggled. Now, again, what we saw at this practice was the red zone, working on red zone offense, not really using the run a ton. And when we look back at this camp, the offense has had some issues in the red zone, especially when they don't get the run game going or don't even try to get the run game going. If they are specifically working on the red zone passing game, they've had issues. They've been a little bit better in the high red zone. Low red zone's been a nightmare. So again, on Sunday, Maye had a rough practice, and it was a red zone practice. And on the balance of it, it's been pretty tough sledding for this offense inside the red area. Whether it's, 11 on 11, 7 on 7s, whatever they're trying to do. I don't know if Drake Maye got too excited. That does seem to be something with him. Sometimes he gets a little bit too amped up and it backfires. So maybe he was a little too excited coming off Friday night. Maybe he was trying to prove to the team that he has figured some things out after that fumble. We know that Vrabel in the post game did not mince words with Drake Maye in that fumble. He let everybody know that he wasn't happy with that. Terrible decision. Needs to be better. Now, of course, Maye recovered within the game, scored a touchdown on a scramble, but maybe he went out there on Sunday and said, I'm going to prove to these guys, I'm going to prove in the red zone that I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to have a great practice. And maybe he got into it a little bit too excited and got too far ahead. Now, the question is whether or not Maye will respond this week to the rough start on Sunday that he had, because I'm sure he understands. I'm sure that the entire team understands, coaches, players, how big of a week this truly is. And what we need to see from Maye this week, number one, we need to see him be decisive and be under control. Being decisive and throwing pick after pick is not good. If he is being decisive this week and he's under control, taking care of the football, that's what we need to see. We need to see him truly understand what is happening before the snap and after the snap as well, because that was part of the issue on that play Friday night when he fumbled. Evan Lazar wrote about it at Patriots.com. Washington's second-string defense used a post-snap rotation showing single high safety at the snap before falling into a cover 2 on the strip sack. Lazar writes, typically, you don't want to work the slant flat concept to Maye's left against a too high safety defense because the corner in that flat and the linebacker are well positioned to defend the concept. You've got too many guys on the left side to worry about. Maye could have ID'd the post-snap rotation into cover 2 and worked the right side where he had Pop Douglas on a stick option route versus a linebacker, or like Vrabel said post-game, taking a sack and punted the ball away on 4th down. So Maye made one mistake, and that was the fact that he wasn't looking to go right after the post-snap change by Washington's defense. And then, of course, secondly, he didn't take the sack. He didn't throw the football in the 5th row. He fumbled the ball. And as we mentioned last episode, the bonus episode, that there was some confusion with Campbell and Wilson on the left side as well. So you marry all of those issues, and it results in a disastrous play. So we need to see Maye be decisive. We need to see him under control. We need to see him, of course, limiting turnovers, whether it's fumbles on the snap or throwing it to the other team. We need to see him understand what's happening before the snap and after the snap so he can adjust to the defense so he doesn't walk into these mistakes. You need to see overall progression from Maye this week. You need to feel good at the end of this week. Not just talking about Saturday, because I don't know how much he's going to play in the game. But he has to walk away from this week feeling good about himself and proving that he is taking the steps, proving that he's doing what he needs to get done by week 1 against the Raiders. This is a critical, pivotal week. Can't say it enough. And the questions for Drake Maye, does he trust his offensive line? Does he fully trust the O-line? We'll see. What wide receivers are going to be, quote unquote, running with Maye during joint practice? Is this going to be a consistent rotation? Or is McDaniels and Vrabel going to stick with their top 3? Is Diggs going to be out there for the entire joint practice? Are you going to have Pop and Booty with Diggs? Or are you going to put Hollins in there for Booty? So what receivers will be working with Maye the most? That's important. And let's not forget, Vrabel said after the Washington game, he was mostly happy with what he saw, but one of the things that he didn't like on the offense was the passing offense. And he mentioned that in the postgame. We need to work on our passing offense. So will they put a lot of emphasis on that this week heading into the Minnesota joint practices? And will they put a lot of emphasis into that during the Minnesota joint practices? So big week. Maye can certainly respond, come back if he has great joint practices. Nobody's going to care what happened on Sunday. But it was a rough start for Drake Maye. And the rough start during the biggest week of his camp. And you could argue the biggest week of the team's camp. Josh McDaniels is leaving clues to how he really feels about this offensive line. We're going to explain next as we continue with today's episode of Locked On Patriots, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of the year. NFL kickoff almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. Maybe you're playing Yahoo Fantasy right now, and you should be. And your friends should be as well, whether they're first-timers or veterans making their millionth league, hanging out with you. Fantasy football is the best, and Yahoo Fantasy's been at it for 28 years, and they're dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. A coaching staff truly tells us how they feel about certain personnel by the way they handle said personnel. And Josh McDaniels, if you go back and you watch Friday night's game, if you go back and start thinking about certain instances and what the OC is doing and what he's calling, he's telling us, Josh McDaniels is telling us that he doesn't quite trust the offensive line to hold their water one-on-one, man-to-man. He doesn't trust the O-line just yet. He might get there. He might get there this week. But just looking at the joint practices and then especially the Friday night game against Washington, it tells us what McDaniels thinks. Now, I'll explain how. Number one, the passing offense against Washington. The number one priority for the passing offense was to avoid pressure. Evan Lazar wrote the following: the Patriots understandably didn't want to put their starting quarterback in harm's way by scripting mostly quick passes, with Maye's average target depth 5.5 yards and time to throw 2.46 seconds reflecting that. Eventually, we'll have more concrete takeaways when they open the offense up. Now, again, they might open the offense up against Minnesota. They might get there this week. And this might have just been Josh McDaniels easing the offensive line into actual game action, easing Drake Maye into action. But when you call that type of passing offense, what you're telling all of us is that you're not necessarily super confident in the idea of the offensive line being able to hold up in pass protection for longer than 2.5 seconds. You want to get the ball out quickly. And you want to get the ball out quickly like that over and over and over again because, as Lazar wrote, you're not putting your quarterback in harm's way. So that tells me there's not the ultimate trust from the OC right now in his offensive line. And when you call that type of passing offense, you're, of course, going to limit big plays. What you need is big-time yak, maybe some trickery. That's how you get the big plays. But when you're throwing quick game, you're not looking for huge chunks of yardage. You're looking at trying to move those sticks, pick up 5, 6, 7 yards at a time, get rid of the football quickly, pick up some positive yardage, on to the next one. That's what you're doing. So you're limiting the big plays, but you're also theoretically limiting the messes. And McDaniels, he doesn't have to look any further than that play we discussed in the first segment with the fumble and how Wilson and Campbell got all muddled up there. And he could look at that, and that's justification alone, saying, yeah, I don't want to put Drake Maye in that kind of situation again. Not yet. I need to see more from that O-line. I need to see better pass protection. Another hint as to how McDaniels feels about this offensive line right now is the fact that he focused during that first preseason game. He focused on helping the tackles. That was one of his top priorities in that game on Friday night. Back to Lazar, the Patriots either wanted to work on chipping the ends, or it's a sign of things to come because they gave their tackles chip help throughout this game when they were drop back passing. That's not a bad idea when facing longer down and distances with tackles who could be vulnerable in pass protection. Maybe some live in-game reps to develop chemistry between the backs and the tackles for future endeavors. So maybe McDaniels is just working on chipping, and that's why he consistently had his backs chipping for the tackles. Or maybe he has his backs chipping consistently because he doesn't quite trust the offensive line yet. I go back to last season. One of my biggest issues with that offense with Alex Van Pelt is the fact that he did not help his tackles enough, not nearly enough. Way too many times did we see Vidarian Lowe or DeMontre Jacobs on an island. Way too often we saw those tackles on an island against some of the best pass rushers in all of football. It was inexcusable. It was illogical. So if it's we're not going to help our tackles and we're going to leave them on an island and they're going to keep getting beat, well, if that's the option, you don't go with that option. You go with the other option, which is we help our tackles. We help our tackles to make sure that they're not getting toasted every single snap or every other snap. So I would rather have McDaniels helping the tackles with the running backs and chipping than have it the other way around and see what we saw last year with AVP. I don't need to see that. If you have some concern that your guys could be a turnstile, whether it's Campbell, whether it's Bryant, whether it's Jacobs, whether it's Moses, whether it's Lowe, whichever tackle you're talking about, if you're afraid or concerned that guy is going to be a turnstile, then you have to adapt as a coach. And the fact that McDaniels was chipping to help the tackles on Friday night, I think speaks volumes, because not only were you doing that in the preseason game and doing it consistently, but you were also doing it in a game where Washington sat 30 dudes. Those were pretty much the twos on the defense. So if you're not chipping just to work on the chipping, if you're chipping because you've got concern about your pass protection on the edge, and you're doing that during, a preseason game where you're facing the backups, that's interesting. And if that is the case, if McDaniels was concerned going into the first preseason game against the twos, concerned about pressure on Maye and the tackles not being able to stand up, then that tells us a lot where McDaniels is right now and where those young offensive linemen and the offensive line as a whole is right now. Now, again, all of this is subject to change. We continue to practice throughout the week. You get into the joint practices and you get into the second preseason game, and maybe you see less chipping. Maybe the offensive line builds a little bit more confidence. McDaniels feels a little bit more confident in them, and you're not seeing it as much. But right now, early stages, what we're seeing is an offensive coordinator trying to protect not only his quarterback, but protect his offensive line. And the other way to do that is to lean on the run game. And you saw the Patriots run the football a lot right away in that first preseason game. Now, that could just be setting the tone, but you had Henderson and Stevenson running the football early on. Drake Maye scrambled. And, you had some good success with the top offense. They gave you almost 60 yards on 8 rushing attempts. But the run game is another way to make sure you're protecting your offensive line if you have questions about their ability to protect your quarterback. It's kind of simple. Now, the history of McDaniels and Vrabel also tell us, and I did a podcast on this a couple of months ago at Everything Pats on the YouTube channel if you want to check it out. The history tells us that McDaniels and Vrabel, they're going to run the football. Their history tells us that, but it also fits the offensive line strengths right now, because what you have is you have a very athletic offensive line, especially left tackle, left guard, and center. Bradbury, Wilson, Campbell, those guys are excellent athletes. And we all know that Bradbury's had issues with the pass rush, and you got those 2 rookies on the left side having to deal with the pass rush. So not only does it help protect the offensive line, but it fits their strengths, run blocking and athleticism right now. But McDaniels, with the passing offense, getting rid of the football quickly, constantly helping his offensive tackles, and making it making it an absolute priority to establish the run game. Those three things tell us he's not supremely confident in that O-line right now and their ability to protect Drake Maye. We'll see if that changes this week. We'll see if it changes throughout time. And, of course, Minnesota, they're no joke. This defensive line, Grenard, Van Ginkel, Hargrave, Allen, Brian Flores calling the defense, tough assignment. A critical Pat returns to practice. The details of that and more next as we continue with today's episode of Locked On Patriots, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. You ever wonder, by the way, what your view will actually look like before you buy concert tickets? Well, Game Time shows you a panoramic seat view, so there are absolutely no surprises to where you'll be sitting and what that view is. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So we talked about in the first segment the bad news. Drake Maye had a slow, rough start to his critical week. But here's the good news. The other side of the football. Maye struggling means the defense played fairly well. And there was no Christian Gonzalez. And according to Coach Vrabel before the practice, we should not expect Gonzalez to be on the field this week. So it looks like, at least for this week, Gonzalez will remain out with that hamstring. But even though Gonzalez won't be returning, we got a big return during Sunday's practice because Carlton Davis, yes, that Carlton Davis that you signed in the offseason, the guy who's been mostly MIA for the past couple of weeks, Carlton Davis was on the practice field. And he wasn't just on the practice field watching practice. He wasn't just standing around in his pads, taking in the day. No, Davis was out there. Davis was participating. Evan Lazar posted Carlton Davis was taking live 11-on-11 reps for the first time in a while. How long? If you look back, about 2+ weeks, the last time we saw Davis taking actual 11-on-11s. Taylor Kyles posted Carlton Davis getting extensive action. And by the way, Davis did have a pass breakup during this practice. And Davis, he adds physicality. He is a very physical corner. He's a physical corner in coverage. He's a physical corner at the line of scrimmage. He's a physical corner against the run. He is a perfect fit for a Vrabel Terrell Williams defense because of that physicality and violence. He comes downhill, not worried about anything. He's going to smoke a back if he can smoke a running back. So he's going to add to the physicality. He is obviously the second best corner the Patriots have on this roster aside from Gonzalez. He's a legitimate corner who can play man coverage. So great to have him back. Let's see if he stays on the field. Certainly feels like the Patriots are trying to ramp up this week, getting ready for Minnesota because of what we discussed in the first segment. They know how important this week is. So Davis is back on the field. He's back practicing, going through 11-on-11s. That is a very, very positive step for this defense. You're going to need Davis, especially while Gonzalez is out. You're going to need Davis. But Carlton Davis wasn't the only defender who returned to practice. The guy who was having the best camp until an injury slowed him down, he missed the last few practices, K'Lavon Chaisson was back at practice on Sunday. That's another positive step. And right away, he gets credit for a sack during practice. This guy has been awesome in camp. He's been one of the best stories during this training camp. And the fact that he was back and that he was participating on Sunday means an awful lot. It means the injury that he was dealing with is not a long-term injury. We should absolutely anticipate him being part of the joint practices against the Vikings. And that helps the pass rush, and that helps the defensive line because he's been so good. He has been a very, very, very pleasant surprise, and we see the ramp up. And the ramp up we also saw on the offensive side, by the way. Morgan Moses was back at practice and involved. So we start to see these veterans coming back this week, and we'll see if they continue to have the level of involvement they had on Sunday. There's no reason to believe they're going to take a step back during those joint practices. At least that would not be my expectation. But we'll see. Mike Vrabel clearly has a plan. The coaching staff clearly has a plan of how they're going to manage some of these veterans. And we'll see how the rest of the week unfolds. But it was a great, great sign to see Chason and Davis and Moses out there being involved. Harold Landry was out there. So we are seeing the ramp up. We're seeing these guys get ready for the big week. Meanwhile, the defensive backs, speaking of Davis wasn't the only one showing up. The defensive backs showed up again during this practice. Doug Kyde tweeted out, defensive back pass breakups. Kobe Biner, Mr. Irrelevant, had a PBU. Marcus Jones had a PBU. The aforementioned Davis PBU. And Alex Austin also had a pass breakup. So you're seeing a very active defensive backfield, which is nice to see. I mean, these guys have been practicing now an awful lot without Gonzalez and without Davis. And have they made some mistakes? Sure. Have they been beaten from time to time? Absolutely. But has it been a nightmare? No. Now, DJ James did leave practice. Could have been a hammy. I don't know what's going on with these hammies. But DJ James, who has done a very good job, had some tough time on Friday night, did have the pick. But he's mostly been really good at camp. He came up lame and ended up having to leave the practice, so we'll keep an eye on that. But these defensive backs, it's not like they've been embarrassing themselves. The depth there at cornerback has fared better than I would have thought they would without their top two corners. Now you get Davis back, and obviously you hope that Gonzalez is back during that week where they have in between the final preseason game and the kickoff against the Raiders. That's what I would expect, is if he's going to be back by week one, as Vrabel said, that's the week he's probably going to get active and get going. But these other cornerbacks are showing up. You know who else is showing up? Craig Woodson. Craig Woodson, first team reps during Sunday's practice. Kyle Duggar officially, for this practice at least, moved to the second unit. Duggar officially on that backup defense. Woodson took the snaps. And Woodson had a good Friday night. He was flying all over the field. He was, doing a bunch of different things. Evan Lazar points out, during that game, he played center field, split field safety. He covered tight ends. He blitzed. He played in post-snap rotations. And that means this coaching staff believes Woodson can handle a lot on his plate and that he brings a lot of versatility. And it's going to be a big tell during the Minnesota joint practices how Woodson is handled. If this is a ramp-up, which it looked like it was on Sunday, if this is a ramp-up for the Minnesota joint practices and then that preseason game on Saturday, if we see Woodson continually getting snaps on that first unit on the back end, we would have to expect him to be out there playing a lot of snaps with the top defense against Minnesota. It'll be a big tell. If he's out there against Minnesota getting a bunch of snaps and Duggar remains on that backup defense, we can start talking about Woodson leapfrogging Duggar officially. Can the linebackers cover? We'll see. It's one of my questions that I have. They've had some struggles there lately, Spillane and Ellis. They've also made a couple of plays. Alex Austin, by the way, playing a decent amount of nickelback. Taylor Kyles posted that, Vrabel historically likes bigger slot corners. We've talked about that past episodes. Austin, according to Taylor Kyles, had some good tape against Washington as both a pass rusher and run defender, and against the pass, all three. It does feel like Alex Austin's going to get snaps this year. My final question this week is, as far as we look towards this week against Minnesota, my final question for today's podcast is, how will the Patriots staff handle Christian Barmore? He's absolutely being managed. He was limited on Sunday. He didn't play on Friday night. He's been managed all camp long. He's had a great camp, so what they've been doing has been working. Will they continue to do that? Or will he get a ramp up and see him more than we might have seen him the past few weeks, the first few weeks of this camp? But he's been great, and he could have a huge impact on this defense. Barmore has looked excellent, according to those on the ground. So we'll see how Barmore is handled moving forward this week as they get ready for the Vikings joint practices. That wraps up this edition of Locked On Patriots. Reach out to me on Twitter at Nick C Radio. Don't forget to throw a comment in on the YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the like button. Give us that thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you for being an everydayer, making Locked On Patriots your first listen. Second listen, check out Locked On Bets. Betting experts Lee Sterling, Kevin Rogers, they've got you taken care of. Find Locked On Bets on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.